Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Zoom In, Zoom Out podcast. A podcast where we discuss perspective, where we try to talk about failure, where we're your three woefully underqualified hosts. And today we don't even have a guest to help combat our nonsense. So you're stuck with us. But it's essentially a podcast where we try to help you and, in the same process, us understand that everyone's a lot more similar than we think. Everyone goes through the same failures, goes through the same issues like the one we're discussing today. But it's more about trying to figure out what systems to combat them works the best for you. So today we're discussing comparison.
Yeah. So, like Akash mentioned, I think this is something that we all go through. Comparison is something which is just wired into us, right? Uh, like we've all heard this, right? That don't compare yourself to others. You need to act confident. I've also heard something like don't care about what other people think of you. It's fine. You don't need to compare so much. But I think comparison is interesting because it's something that helps you drive yourself further, and also sometimes like becomes jealousy, right? So like right now, uh, there are a couple of things going inside my mind. I'm like, oh, Kash is wearing a cooler T-shirt than I am, or like Parth has better hair than I do. Uh,
No one has thought that
and
ever.
yeah, and just stuff like that's just going in my mind, just along with a lot of other stuff that's keeping me on track to being myself, and that's why I'm pretty interested in like discussing comparison with you guys today. What do you guys have to say
Yeah,
about this?
yeah, for sure. I think comparison is something that we all do, whether we want to or not. But before we discuss why, like, where we compare, I think it's important to talk a little bit about why we compare in the first place, right? It's so, I mean, when I was reading up and trying to find out more about this, what I realized is that the way our brains work is that all our evaluations, or most of them, right, in the real world, are relative in nature. And the reason this happens is because our mind has limited cognitive resources, right? So our brain wants to conserve as much energy as possible. So when you see something, the easiest way for your brain to make sense of that is to compare it to something it already knows, instead of building up a whole new picture from the ground up, right? So most of the synapses in our brain, most of the judgments that we're making are in some way comparative in nature. So just the fact that it's comparative doesn't make that judgment bad, right? That's just the way our brains work. But I think where the problem starts coming in is when we use that comparison to either put ourselves down or to do something like that. And then there was this really interesting idea called a scarcity mindset, right? It's where people think that there's a limited amount of some resource, even if it's something like happiness, right? Which there isn't theoretically. It's not that if one person is happy, another person can't be happy. But because our brains are wired along this mindset, what ends up happening is that you feel jealous, you get into unhealthy competition and all sorts of problems. Um, so yeah, what do you all think about this?
Actually, that's really interesting because I don't think I've ever thought about why we compare in terms of limiting the amount our brain has to do. Because
Yeah.
that is the natural resource. We tend to do path of least resistance. And that makes sense that you compare because you already have a foundation to which to pit yourself against. And in terms of comparison, Aryant mentioned how comparison can be a very positive thing in some regard. It can help motivate you, things like that. But at least in my personal experience, I found that most of the time it's very detrimental. And I think the biggest example of comparison, and something that I'm pretty sure we all can safely say that we've experienced, is on social media, especially over this past year and a half, these past 2 years, where we've used social media a lot more than ever before. And the social media where everyone's posting their highlight reel and you have your behind the scenes footage which you're trying to
Yeah.
compare, and you're like, something isn't matching up. Why are these people seeming to have fun all the time? And that that was a lot of the time, that's something that I've experienced too. You have this fear of missing out. You're like, I'm clearly not having as much fun as some of these people.
Yeah.
I'm clearly not as good looking, or not as, my ability isn't as much. And so in that sense, it can be a very detrimental thing where you're putting yourself down, where you think that the happiness you can get, they're taking away with the scarcity mindset thing. And so in that sense, comparison has been quite negative. What have y'all experienced with comparison?
I think I experienced like healthy competition with comparison once. I think comparison became an accountability factor in one of the tests that I was giving in high school. So when I was in 12th grade, a friend of mine and I got into like this heated argument that either of us are better than the other in academics, and this just kept going on. And after a point, it just became very serious because the person would just walk up and be like, see, this is why I'm better than you, and I'm better than you. Like the subject is math, okay? So the person needs to come up and he needs to be like, I'm better than you in math because I did this faster than you did, and yeah, this just concludes that I'm better in math than you, math than you, than you are. Uh, so this went on, and then it just became serious because then we had to like draw up contracts and like get our friends to like sign on it, and then wait for our midterm results. And I remember just because we drew up all those contracts and like the comparison just like got into like our learning process as well. Like when I was learning, I know this is not the best, but I was thinking that I really need to like push myself like the extra mile because I can't let the other person get ahead or something, like at least like in terms of like preparation or something. Um, so and when I ended up getting like more grades than that the other person, which is not a good evaluation of like ability or anything else. Uh, but that just felt nice, and I think that helped me in a way because I was able to get the extra, like those extra points and the grade that I wanted to. So that's how comparison, in a really bad way, ended up just being a good motivator for me. But has it ever been similar or something different for you?
So, at least in the sense of like the term healthy competition, which is something I think
Yeah,
we all strive towards, in that sense, I don't think comparison is ideal. And even in the situation where you described, where you had to draw
yeah,
up a contract, you had all your friends
yeah,
sign, like act as
yeah,
whatever signatories, and
yeah,
they
yeah,
saw the whole process happen. That entire situation, and afterwards, where you spoke about how your relationship with learning changed, and you were learning to
yeah,
beat that person. Now, I
yeah,
think while that can give you a short term benefit in the sense that for that midterm, yeah, you'll be motivated, you'll push through. But it again comes to the entire motivation versus discipline argument we've been having on this podcast for a couple of episodes now. And that short term benefit might actually lead to very detrimental long term effects. And because then you start valuing, so when you have that feeling of, oh, I've done this, I've beaten someone else, then you start putting your self value, you start attaching it to the outcome of things as opposed to the
yeah,
process, and as opposed to
yeah,
actually like enjoying
yeah,
learning and having a healthy relationship with it. And that can lead
yeah,
to a lot of worse things like imposter syndrome, because sometimes it might not work out. No matter how much you compare yourself with others and
yeah,
motivate yourself, they might be better than you at some things. They
yeah,
might, yeah. So in that sense, it can lead to, like, even though on the surface it may seem like healthy competition, it can actually lead to a very unhealthy relationship for yourself with whatever it is that you're
yeah.
comparing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think even a like comparison right now while I'm taking like a CS class at my college, I can say the same thing right now. There are a lot of people who are better at CS than I am, and I found this out over the course of my class so far. And if I go and compare myself with every student in the class and be like, no, I'm better than all of you. Let's draw up contracts. I don't know if it's gonna end up well for me, Because if I start, I think this is something which we've spoken about before as well. It's called self worth theory, where you start basing your self worth on your performance, and that's not a good identifier for your ability, and definitely not your self worth. So if I start basing my self worth on just the performance on my tests or just my performance on this class, then I don't know if that's going to be the best for me. Or I'm sure there are a lot more smarter people, or a lot better people at CS than I am in the class already. So yeah, what do you have to say about this part?
Yeah, I think in general, like Akash is saying, you shouldn't be comparing yourself with others because it's going to lead to, as you were saying, not feeling good about yourself and so on. But I feel like in certain situations, it can actually be helpful, right? For example, there might be certain classes that you have to do which you really don't want to, which you're not interested in, right? Because be it in school or in for certain requirements in college. In that situation, like you were saying, if you had a friend, right, and you made like a friendly wager that let's see who does better. And you use that as a point of motivation to get you through that one class. So not making this your default learning style for everything, but for certain instances where doing something else or being keeping that discipline is a lot harder, which let's be honest, it's not that easy in everything, right? So in certain cases it could be fine, but again, as long as it doesn't go too far and as long as it doesn't become your norm. Because I've heard of stories in colleges where people have given even like strangers fake like midterm syllabus and things like that to make other people do worse so that they could feel that they are doing better, right? Be it maybe it was on a curve or so on, but obviously that's reached a point where it's extremely unhealthy. So it's about, in general, having a learning style that is based on yourself. But in some situations, you could use this as motivation. So, but even like, for example, working out, right? If you had a friend and you decided, let's both try to see, let's keep 6 days a week as our goal to work out, and let's see who's actually able to hit that goal consistently. So you're comparing yourself to each other, but it's not like, oh, let's see who's able to lift more at the end of it, because that's not necessarily in your control, but it's something that's helping you keep accountable with someone else without becoming toxic in some ways.
I fully agree with that. I think there's like two kinds of comparisons where you can make. One is comparison on the outcome. So, comparison on how many
Yeah.
marks you get, comparison on how much weight you can lift, comparison on how well you can perform a certain task. And that's what I think can lead to very unhealthy tendencies if you do that with
Mm.
other people. I
Mm.
fully recommend comparing the outcome if it's comparison with yourself, and if you're
Mm.
trying to make sure that you keep improving day on day, and there will be days where you don't improve, but you're trying to aim for a general positive outcome, a general
Yeah.
positive growth. And the other is comparison of your process, like Path said, where you suppose you have a friend and you want to keep each other accountable, and you're like, let's compare the number of days we can go to the gym.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's a very powerful, because you can, a lot of the times I found inspiration by comparing, say, if I want to work out or if I want to learn programming, by comparing my work ethic in that to other people's. And then I can be like, okay, maybe I'm not working as hard as I possibly can. This is an
Mm.
example of a template for how I could try to work harder, and then I use that. So the outcome again might not be in your hands. So trying to compare that, I think, is slightly redundant and detrimental. But the process is pretty much entirely in your hands. And that's where something, if you compare, you can actually try to push yourself and make it a healthy competition. So
Yeah,
comparison can be very positive, but you just need to figure out what type of comparison you're doing and how to make sure you're
yeah.
doing the right thing.
Yeah, and I really agree with you, Akash. I think this is related to this concept called hedonic adaptation, that I read about. So hedonic adaptation is nothing but like, I think, humans adapting to like new circumstances, and like how that just becomes your new normal. So if somebody, let's say I go out and start basing my well-being on just the like comparative outcomes, so I don't think I'll end up happy. So like right now I'll want a car, the next, and once the car becomes the new normal for me, I'll want a better car. Once I get a better car, I want a plane, something like a helicopter, and then the list will just go on, right?
Mm.
Uh, so so if you start just basing your like well-being on just like comparative outcomes, that I'm gonna base my happiness on just if I can do better than Bob or better than Parth, uh, or something like just what I talk like with the car analogy. I don't think it's the best approach. But do you think you've read about better solutions or implemented better solutions about keeping yourself in track with comparisons?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think first that idea of hedonic adaptation really makes a lot of sense. I remember I read this thing. There was this like study of, I think, 10, 12,000 people in England, where the study showed that even when everyone's average income rose, people didn't increase their, or say they had an increase in life satisfaction unless their income rose higher than the other people, their peers, and other people of the same education level. So again, it wasn't that people were inherently just like, oh, I'm feeling like I'm being able to do better in life and so on because I have a greater income in general, but it was only when it was relative to other people. So again, that whole nature of comparing yourself with someone else, bringing in that scarcity, seeing what your new normal is, led to people not thinking they're actually doing good, right? Which is definitely detrimental both to yourself and to society as a whole. And to that extent, I think that one thing that definitely helps, linking back to what Akash said about comparing with yourself, right? So it's this entire concept of temporal comparison. So you're not comparing with other people, but you're comparing across time with yourself. So with the past, the present, and the future, right? And this isn't just as simple as, oh, where was I then? Where am I now? But it can really help in a lot of other ways because you can sort of chart a progress or chart a map for yourself and also figure out where you want to be at a certain point of time. What do you need to do to reach that point, right? So structure your goals, see how you can progress towards that, chart how you've been doing in the past, and like really understand a lot more about yourself. Maybe certain things work for you, maybe multitasking doesn't work for you, maybe when you work out in the morning for like 3 months in a, like when you've been working out the last 3 months every day in the morning, you've actually been a lot more productive in the day, right? So it both could really help you structure your own goals, see how you're doing, and also help you find out more about yourself.
Yeah, I think that's quite powerful. And it seems to me that I've been doing something similar without necessarily realizing that there was a term for it, which is temporal comparison. But basically, tying back to what I said about social media, now I remember when we were applying for colleges, all of that sort of stuff. There was a point where I was really excited to get onto LinkedIn, and I thought that was like the best place to be on
Same,
for
same.
if I wanted to do anything with regards to college. I had to present myself in a certain way on LinkedIn. So I signed up. I have a blank profile. I have nothing on it. There's a bunch of things I don't understand. What summary? What is all the skills that I have to mention? I don't get it. And then I'm looking at different profiles on LinkedIn, and I see people with like a couple 100,000 followers or whatever. Their profile seems stacked. It's all like I can see that they've done so many courses, they have so many qualifications, so much experience, blah blah blah. And it was very overwhelming. And then at that point, I was just feeling, oh shit, I haven't done anything. And it wasn't I haven't done anything, it was I haven't done anything worthwhile because obviously I haven't put it on LinkedIn, so what have I done? And it's the same thing with the hedonic treadmill, right? Like the hedonic adaptation that we spoke about, where once you achieve something, it becomes the norm so much so that you, like, at least for me, I sort of forget that I achieved anything of value there, even though it
Right.
might have
Yeah.
seemed really important at the time. So I think documenting your success is actually quite useful. And I do this through a journal. It isn't like documenting, oh, this is what I won, blah, blah, blah. It's just documenting like some positive things that happened in the day. Were you able to push yourself a little more in your workout? Did you do some more programming stuff? And that, so a lot of the time before starting, I thought that that's going to make me complacent, and it's going to make me um too proud and be like, I, I lose all my ambition because I'll think that I've achieved a lot when in reality I haven't. But actually, that doesn't happen. What happens is, at least for me, it just helped increase my confidence. and helped me combat the dreaded imposter syndrome that I got whenever I opened my LinkedIn page. And it just helped me realize that, okay, maybe I haven't done as much as these people, but I have done some stuff and I have made progress, which is the important part. And that means that I'm on a steady path to a steady trajectory to actually reach where I want to in life. So documenting success and comparing yourself over time, comparing like positive trends and helping build those positive trends, I thought was really helpful for me to avoid this sort of overwhelming anxiety I got.
Yeah, I think that's super important also. Like we've spoken a lot about documenting failures and making like a failure resume and so on, right? But we haven't really spoken about the other side, documenting your success, like you were saying. And I think that's especially important because quite often we tend to be harsher on ourselves than on other people when we're
Yeah.
making comparisons, right? So you downplay your successes, you feel like it's not enough and so on. And it's not easy to break out of that. So as you were mentioning, one way to do that definitely would be documenting it. Like I was in this class just last week about being a change maker. Right? And in breakout rooms, we were all discussing who do we consider as a change maker. And most people were initially like, yeah, I think like to other people, I think you're a change maker. I think most people are change makers. But when asked if they are a change maker, they'd be like, I want to be, but I don't think I am. Like maybe if I do more. Again, it's that idea that, oh, I haven't done enough, but other people have, and making that comparison. So again, documenting it down would definitely be a good way to not let yourself continuously do that. Um, Arihant, have you used any other techniques that really work for you?
Yeah, so clearly my high school was like full, like my high school life was like full of like comparing myself with like my peers in sometimes an unhealthy way. But this is a trend that I noticed in like unintentional, like I figured out like that this is an actual solution later. It's about finding something more valuable to focus on. Sometimes I used to get obsessed with like what people think, or like, just like by drawing so many comparisons, I used to like just care so much about all those comparisons that I completely lost my drive to do a task or something. That I'm not gonna do this because what will people think about this? Like, I might just come off I might not come off as the smartest person doing this. There are definitely smarter people in my high school who do this because sort of stuff or something. So I realized that when I shift my focus from like caring what people think, or like drawing all those comparisons, to like the value in the task that I was like really chasing, that's when I do best. I think I think even with the math analogy that I brought up earlier, I think the motivator was definitely that to get like to be on top of all my assignments in class, and like just the maths that I was learning for my midterm. But I remember when I was doing math, I was only focusing on the math, and like learning better, like just getting better at those problems. Although that did give me the extra push that I had a whole contract signed up with my friends. Uh, but just having something, if you're like me, if you draw comparisons, and if you sometimes care too much about what other people think, then just finding something more valuable to focus your time on just helps you shift your focus from that to this. And then again, with comparisons, you have the advantage to yourself, right? You get to choose what you want to compare, so you can choose whatever you want to compare. So you can choose how to measure your own success, and you can choose to measure your successes or your failures with somebody else's successes. So if you're like me again, if you want to just not get caught up with that in that whole vicious cycle, you could just play the comparison game to your favor, and you just choose to compare stuff that you like to compare. I don't know um, if that's a good strategy. What do you think about that, Akash? Like seeking favorable comparisons to make yourself happy.
Honestly, I think that's a little more of a quick fix than anything else that might not actually lead to like lasting happiness. And I use the word happiness here quite liberally. It might not lead to like any lasting contentment. It's just a quick thing where you're like, oh, like I'm gonna compare myself with someone necessarily worse than me at a task. And I don't think that's something that I would want to do or try to do, but that is a viable thing that people could do if they wanted to. I think for me, in terms of comparison, if it's comparisons that I know I don't want to make. So if it's comparisons that I want to avoid making, like for example the social media comparisons, another technique that was that I found very powerful was at least trying to identify what I'm comparing. So it, most of the time at least, you aren't comparing everything, you're comparing your insecurities because you feel like these stand out to you, so you're like, this is what I should be comparing. If whether if it's your body, if you're conscious of that, you're comparing that. If it's your circumstances, that. And I think trying to find, like Aryan said, trying to find something more valuable to focus on is very important. And you should have like a task that's ready for you to do, something that you actually enjoy doing, and try to immediately divert your mind when you catch yourself comparing. So you catch yourself, you identify it, you acknowledge to yourself that, okay, I am feeling jealous about this, I am comparing this. And that's a lot of the battle, is just getting
Yeah.
your brain to admit that this is something that you're insecure about and that you're actually comparing. And then you immediately try to switch over as much as possible to that other task to divert your brain and to try to avoid that loop of comparing this, feeling bad, comparing even more, feeling even worse. So yeah, what do you think about this path?
Yeah, I think the first really important step is acknowledging, be it like comparison or if it's worse like jealousy and so on, right? Because until you acknowledge it, it's just going to keep going on in your mind and just going to keep getting more and more amplified. Right? And even when you acknowledge it, it's usually when you're jealous of someone or if you're comparing yourself with someone and putting yourself down. It's because you believe that you should also be at that level, or it's something that you think you should have as well, right? Or you want to have for certain reasons. So instead of just focusing on that jealousy or on that comparison, I think it's important to go to the next step and see, why is it that you either believe that you should have had that, whatever you're comparing the other person to have, or why you think you deserve it, or why you want it and how would you reach that point, instead of focusing on, okay, no, they have it, I don't, they get to go out, or they have like an amazing body, or whatever it might be, right? So instead, focusing on yourself and focusing on what are the causes that are making you reach this point where you're comparing so much. Why are you not happy? What can you change to make yourself feel satisfied, right? Instead of having this comparison going on and on. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's definitely like a great place to start off with.
Yeah, for sure. And before like we wrap up this episode, we've rambled on for a decent amount of time. I think some important takeaways are at least like trying to identify where you're comparing, then trying to reframe the comparison. Maybe you want to compare through the process rather than the outcome.
Yeah.
Maybe you can figure out how documenting your success can help you if that's something that you want to do. Temporal comparison is a very powerful tool. Then trying to understand what you actually like doing, what you seek value in, and trying to do those sort of things more. And maybe if you want to, making some favorable comparisons to feel better about yourself. But before we wrap up, there's this very famous painting. So there's this video I watched by a YouTube channel called The School of Life. A wonderful channel. I highly recommend it. And they were speaking about this painting called Landscape and the Fall of Icarus. I'm going to try my best to describe this for all our audio listeners. We barely get any of y'all anyways. So, but the link to the actual image will be in the show notes. So please do go check that out. And so effectively, the myth of Icarus was that Icarus had wings that his father made for him. And he flew too close to the sun. He was too ambitious. Against his father's wishes, he flew too close to the sun. And so the glue that was holding his wings together melted, and he fell to his death in the ocean. And it's a very powerful story about ambition. But what this picture tries to present is there's a sprawling landscape. You can see a man toiling away at his field. There's a ship in the distance. You can see merchants. There's a lot of positivity in that image. There's a lot of sort of this pastoral allure. And everyone is hard at work, everyone is preoccupied, birds are flying around. And at the bottom right hand corner, this very small portion, you won't even notice it unless I point it out to you. You see a drowning Icarus with his legs sticking out of the water. And the point of the story isn't to belittle Icarus's tragic end, the point of this picture. And it isn't to sort of have an apathy towards disasters. It isn't to present that idea. But a lot of the times we make comparisons and we get insecure about things because we're caught up in that whole, oh, what do others think of me? Like we mentioned at the start of this video. So the point of this image is to realize that, to be quite honest, even if there's a massive tragedy like the tragedy of Icarus, even if there's someone who's fallen from the sky and is drowning, work for other people still goes on. They still have things to do. They're still preoccupied. And that's a big hurdle that people have to sort of jump when you're caught up in this whole, what do other people think about me? But that's once you make that jump, it's a very positive step. And to further, drive home this point, a lot of the times we don't do things because we're worried about what people think. We're like, oh, if I mess up, people are going to remember. But just try to think about any time that you remember someone else messing up, that you remember someone else actually making a massive blunder you're never going to forgive them for, and you're going to hold them in a lesser regard throughout for the rest of your life. And to be honest, you won't be able to think of any. At least I can't. And it's the same for other people. People are far too interested and far too busy in their own lives to actually care about what you're doing. So don't worry about what other people think. It sounds a little pretentious coming from a bunch of 19-year-olds, but at least in whatever we've managed to experience, don't worry about what other people think. Try to see where you're comparing. If you think you're comparing too much and that's making you overwhelmed, see what you're comparing, identify it, and then you can figure out how to successfully tackle it. We'll have all the links for everything we've mentioned in the show notes below. Thank you so much for listening. If you found that this episode helped you, please leave a review in the comments of whatever platform you're using. That'll help us more than you realize. Thank you so much. Guys, is there anything else you want to say before we close?
I think that's a really powerful closing sentiment to leave with. I think we should end at that note, and not worrying about what others think about you, because that leads to a lot of comparisons that are not good for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll hope to see you again next time. Bye.
Bye.